Everyone, welcome to week 2. Usually I do a video for week 1, but there were a few little things going on that prevented me from doing that, so I apologize. This is for week 2, and right now I hope you're doing really well in settling into the course. This week we begin to really look at how to read literature as literary scholars and not just somebody that's just reading a story for entertainment. When most people read fiction, they focus on what's happening, the plot, the characters, the ending. However, here you're going to be analyzing. So literary analysis asks us to look beneath the surface. We began asking questions about how the story is told, why the author is making a certain choice, and what deeper meanings emerge through those choices. How are those choices functioning to actually get us through the text? To prove the point, to argue the point, whatever it is that the author is doing there. What's happening and how is it functioning? That's really what I want you to focus on. I have said for years WTF, and it doesn't stand for the terrible thing. It stands for what's the function of whatever's happening. One of the course readings this time is comparing this process to the unfolding of a flower. So at first we see only the outer petals, but as the flower opens, hidden beauty, richness, complexity, all of that comes to light and you can see it. Literature works much the same way. The more closely we read, the more we're going to discover. So this week you will be studying literary techniques and the 4 voices that operate within fiction. The voice of the narrator, the voice of the author, the voices of all of the characters, the voice of the reader. So you also have a voice in this. Together, these voices create meaning, and you're going to be able to understand the theme of the work. By the end of this week, you should be able to demonstrate skills needed for close, careful reading. And I know there's a lot of reading here, but I want you to at least be closely reading those things that you are writing to in the project and in the forum. Okay, I know that AI is a great tool. You can pull that up to give you summaries of things. I'm not going to recommend that for the things that you're writing on. It's not bad to get a general idea, but if you're writing about it, you need to be reading it first. You will never be a great writer if you're not a great reader first. So you should be able to demonstrate skills needed for close, careful reading, including identifying your audience, purpose, character motivation, and authorial techniques. So that's really the rhetorical situation. Who's the speaker? Who's the audience? What's the purpose? You should also be able to analyze how literary elements contribute to the meaning. So what's going on with a point of view, with any personification, any of those little things that you've known, all of your life metaphors, similes, those kind of things. And you should be able to recognize and evaluate the 4 voices operating within fiction. So we already talked about those: character, reader, author, narrator, that kind of thing. And then, of course, you'll be able to write a successful voices in fiction essay by the end of this week. Okay, so let's talk about your assignments for the week. Assignment 1 is due on Wednesday. It's the discussion forum. Okay, you're talking about character motivation in this forum. So as you read the assigned stories, I want you to ask yourself, why does this character make the decisions they make? What fears, desires, beliefs, or values drive the character's actions? And how do these motivations, or those motivations, how do they influence the outcome of the story? Your initial post is going to be 2 paragraphs. Okay, 2. In the first paragraph, compare the motivations of characters in 2 stories. In the second paragraph, compare the motivations of characters in 2 different stories. So that's 4 stories total. Each paragraph should identify a common motivation and explain how it influences the character's choices. I want you to remember that literary analysis requires evidence. So please don't give me something that does not have properly quoted things in it. The assignment requires at least 2 citations per paragraph and proper MLA documentation. So while you're reading, it's going to be really helpful for you to ask yourself questions. What conflicts are occurring? How do the events connect to each other, and how could you connect things across stories? How do characters interact? What do their actions, words, and thoughts reveal about their personalities? And do the characters change, meaning that they are dynamic and they're changing? Or do they stay the same, so they're static? And then why? Your goal is not simply to retell the story. I don't want a summary of the story. I've read those stories a lot. I want you to explain how the character motivation helps us understand what the author is trying to convey, the deeper meaning of that piece. Okay? Please make sure when you do a discussion post that you cite everything. Each one of your posts requires citations. This past week, I saw several that lost major points simply because they did not include citations in the reply posts. Those are required, so please make sure that you read your directions very carefully. For your project 2, the essay that you're going to write for Voices in Fiction, that's the major assignment this week. It is due on Sunday evening, 11:59. It gives you the opportunity to practice literary analysis using the 4 voices that we discussed here, and then there's some more in the lecture materials for you to look at. You'll choose one of the assigned short stories and analyze it for the following 4 voices. So pick one story, tell me about the narrator. The narrator is the voice telling the story, so it could be an omniscient narrator, a limited omniscient narrator, first person, or objective. So pay attention to what those mean in your lecture notes. As you write this section, I want you to ask yourself, who's telling the story? How does the point of view shape what the reader knows? What does the reader gain from this perspective? And how does it affect the conflict, the climax, and the resolution? So that plot diagram, how does that affect that? Voice number 2 is your author. So this time you're going to be looking at what the author is doing through their literary and stylistic techniques. So they could be using symbolism, setting, plot, foreshadowing, imagery, tone, form, and style. So I want you to think about those things. So for example, ask yourself, are there any important symbols here? Does the setting contribute to the meaning? Is there imagery that repeats throughout the work? What tone do you hear? So remember, tone and mood go together. Tone is the author's attitude toward the piece, and mood is how it makes you feel. What stylistic choices make the story effective? One of the biggest mistakes that students make is discussing only what happens in the story. Strong literary analysis is not a summary. It is an explanation of how the author's techniques create meaning. So I want you to focus on the author's craft. Voice number 3, those are the characters. So depending on which piece you have, the characters are going to be the author's vehicle for expressing their ideas. So some characters may even function as the author's mouthpiece. That happens. As you analyze characters, I want you to consider what motivates them, what beliefs shape their decisions, how do they change throughout the story, and how do they help reveal the theme. Always pay close attention to what characters say, do, and think. Their words and actions often reveal the author's deeper message. Voice 4 is the reader, okay? That's really the most personal. It's the final voice, last voice here, but it's really the most personal. You're the reader. Reader response criticism reminds us that meaning is created not only by the author, but also by the interaction between the text and its audience. Each reader brings personal experiences, assumptions, beliefs, and even expectations to a story. So in this section, I want you to think about, what did you expect after you read the title? Did the story happen as you thought it would? How did you respond emotionally? Have you ever been reading something and wanted to throw the book? What experiences from your own life came to mind? And did the story challenge or change your thinking in any way? This is the one section in the essay that you can write in first person because you're talking about yourself. So that's appropriate. Before you submit your essay, I want you to keep these important things in mind. First, make sure you are analyzing and not just summarizing. There is a small summary paragraph required, but most of your paper should be focusing on interpretation and analysis. Also, please make sure that each body paragraph follows a clear structure. Something that I'm going to suggest to you and that I'll post in the news is the Jane Schaefer paragraph pattern. That really helps you to write solid paragraphs, but you need to make sure, even if you don't use that, that you have a topic sentence for each paragraph, at least 2 examples with proper citations from the text, and commentary and analysis that explains how those examples support your point and how they connect back to the thesis in your introduction. I want you to make sure that you're really working on using proper literary vocabulary from this week's lectures. So make sure that you address things like point of view, symbolism, setting, imagery, tone, style, foreshadowing, what's the theme, is there any diction? Of course, there's diction involved. So diction, metaphor, and characterization, those should become part of basically your toolbox when you're writing a paper like this. I also want you to realize that being specific matters. Strong literary analysis is always built on strong specific evidence. So use specific quotations, paraphrases, and examples from the story, and make sure you document that correctly using MLA format. As you work through this week's reading, I want you to read slowly and attentively. Pay attention not only to what the story says, but also to how it says it. Listen for the narrator's voice, watch for the author's techniques, and observe how the characters reveal meaning. Reflect on your own response as a reader. When you begin to recognize these different voices kind of working together, that literature is going to come alive to you in really new and exciting ways. Stories become more than entertainment. They become conversations between authors, narrators, characters, and readers. So that's where that voice is coming in. I look forward to reading what you write and seeing what you've discovered as you're going through this week. Please remember, Grammarly is not allowed in this course. It will flag for AI, and if you flag for AI, I am going to give you a 0 and we're going to have a conversation. That doesn't mean you will fail, but it does mean that we're going to have to talk about it. Grammarly flags AI. So it won't be an accusatory conversation. It will simply be what's going on and why is this showing AI generated. Often it's not AI generated, often it's Grammarly because Grammarly is AI. So it's really important to me that you do your own thinking here. And AI will often take away your opportunity to think critically about a piece of literature. So if you have questions, please feel free to email me. I have generous office hours, and typically I'm available as when you're available. But you can see my office hours posted in the news section. You can make a booking link appointment with me to do Zoom, and I am available to help you as much as possible. I look forward to seeing you and working with you. Have a great week.